Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today is the day where Boba Fett got suspended by Fantasy Flight Game. So I put banned on the banner here because it is effectively a ban. We'll talk about this a little bit more later, and it's time to talk about it, guys. There's a lot of implication here for the meta, and we can also talk about retrospectively if it was a good idea or not. But first of all, let's answer the question, is it a good move? Is it a good idea to ban Boba Fett so early into the Set 3 lifetime where the meta has not even had time to develop? And in my humble opinion, yes, absolutely. So obviously you are probably not surprised by my answers because I've expressed during the previous, I expressed in the previous video that I wanted Boba to be banned, but probably the best time to ban him would be to first to see all Set 3. Basically when I made that video, Set 3 spoilers was not done yet. We were still missing a good third of the spoilers, so I was kind of thinking, well, let's see what Set 3 brings to the table. And now that we know that Set 3 brings to the table, I was pretty worried because I couldn't see anything in the new set that could potentially beat Boba. So obviously it's important to keep an open mind. I was like, okay, well, let's see how the meta develops and see how Boba does in this new meta. But I was very much not confident about the fact that any of the new cards or new archetypes that was going to come was going to answer the Boba problem. And we were risking to add into yet another season that would have been completely dominated by Boba Fett. So obviously we're talking about the Boba Fett, the leader, the Boba Fett collecting the bounty, just in case some people are wondering. And the thing is, so yeah, and looks like the developers agree with me because in their communication, they're basically saying that they also are not confident about the fact that Set 3 will answer the problem. And so let's get into into the details. So let's talk about first, was it really the best move? Because obviously I think the vast majority of people agreed that something had to be done about Boba, but not everybody agreed on the way to do it. So a lot of people were advocating for a ban of armor. So Boba Fett's armor, in my opinion, a ban of armor would not have solved the problem. Boba Fett's armor is a strong card, but it is only one of the cards that push Boba over the edge in Set 2. There's plenty of other cards, Bane, TIE Phantoms, Palpatine's Baton, and many other cards that McClunky that really help the archetype. And armor was only one of these cards, and it was indeed a very powerful, and it was probably the flashiest card, but it's not necessarily a card that was helpful for Boba in the matchup where that he was strong against. I think I'm pretty confident that a ban of armor would not have solved the problem. And even if it does nerf Boba to a reasonable extent, I think at the point where we were, I think people were so sick of Boba that even a Boba as a tier 1 deck would not have been satisfactory for people. People would have been salty about a Boba being tier 1 and being one of the best decks in the game, even if it was more in line with the other decks in parallel level. So armor would not have been enough. A ban of Fire Spray would have been a lot more significant for the deck, but it has other advantages. It's not a perfect solution because it penalizes the upcoming Jango. Like, if you ban Fire Spray, you're also banning Fire Spray for Jango, which is pretty bad. And another thing as well is that it does not solve the problem entirely because at the end of the day, even if Boba is more in line with the other power, it's still going to be a very powerful deck. And more importantly, we're still talking about the most aggressive stated leaders in the game. It would still overshadow all the other leaders in black-yellow. So it was not really answering the problem completely. And in my opinion, it just made a lot more sense to ban the leader himself than just banning those cards in this specific instance. Other people were suggesting nerf in terms of its stats or in terms of its cost, and I think those are good solutions. The only problem is that having a number on the card that is non-accurate is extremely disruptive for the gameplay. And it's not only disruptive. A lot of people are saying, "Oh yeah, it's not good for new players," but it's also bad for competitive players as well. It's very disruptive and annoying to have something written on the card that is not accurate, especially when it's something as prevalent as an attack, a defense, or a cost. So, in my opinion, it would have been way too disruptive to have this being nerfed. So, in my opinion, it was just making more sense to ban the thing completely. It would just make more sense to ban the thing. Notice that Boba Fett is not officially banned, he's suspended, which suggests the fact that he's likely to come back at some point. And I'm also expecting that he might come back with a new reprint that would have maybe corrected stats and corrected cost. And if that's the case, then it will obviously be a completely acceptable solution. But in the immediate one but obviously printing a new card takes months. So obviously that means we're not going to see that anytime soon. So in the meantime, we needed something to be done about Boba. Moving on to the other things I want to talk about is like personally, I was expecting them to wait at least until Birmingham to see if Birmingham, which is a pretty big tournament that's going to happen. I think the first major big tournament is going to happen on the new set. People are gonna, how the meta looked like in Birmingham, and then in response to Birmingham, they was gonna ban something. But it looks like they decided to prefer to not wait and do it right away. And I'm really glad personally, because I'm gonna be attending this tournament, and I would much rather be attending this tournament with Boba out of the way. So very good. I'm really happy that they decided to do it before, even though it would have made sense to wait after the tournament is over to see how the meta develops. But once again, as I said earlier, even if the meta is still like kind of like keeping Boba under control, I think having Boba being the best deck of the game for yet another season on by itself would have been something that a lot of people would have been unhappy with. And I can completely sympathize with this, because I started playing Star Wars Unlimited in September 2023. In October 2023, Boba was already the most powerful deck. So for me, it's been almost over a year since Boba has been absolutely dominant in the game. So I'm really glad to have a change and to have a renewal of the meta thanks to this action, especially in conjunction with the introduction of Set 3, which is going to be very exciting. So as we said earlier, Set 3 was unlikely going to solve the problem, and I think it was not worth it to risk it. Like, they could have waited, but if they would have waited, they would have taken the risk of having yet another couple of tournaments being ruined by the leader, and I think this would have been very bad for the game. So I think they took the safe approach here, and once again, he's only suspended, so it's only going to be temporary, but to be fair, all bans are temporary. So obviously it sucks for people who have a Boba showcase, because obviously the Boba showcase is going to drop in value, but I have to say that if you spend 800 euro or $800 on a Boba Fett showcase, knowing this was the best leader in the game, and also definitely a leader that was far beyond in power level any other leader in the game, you took a risk. You took the risk of buying this Boba Fett that expensive. It's on you. You made a bad investment, in my opinion, because I wrote an article on the Garbage Roller website. This article was published 3 weeks before the release of Set 1. So even before the release of the game. And in this article, I say, if there's nothing in the remainder of the cards, because we didn't have all the cards back then, that solve the Boba problem, Boba is going to be extremely oppressive. So we knew it from a very, very long time that Boba was busted. So if you bought a Boba for $800, that's on you. That's on you. You've made a poor investment, because it was obvious that Boba was gonna get nerfed or banned at some point in the game. So yeah, obviously we would rather not ban anything, but we're not gonna make design decisions and balancing decisions to cater to people who sometimes don't even play the game. Like, it doesn't make any sense. We're not gonna make the game sucks for everybody just because a few people made a bad investment decision. So yeah, it sucks, and of course we would rather not ban any card in an ideal world, but yeah, it is what it is. Personally, as a YouTuber, I'm glad I spoke about it. I was probably one of the most vocal YouTuber talking about the Boba problem in depth, and I think it's an important thing to do, because if nobody complains about it, nothing is gonna happen. Like, Fantasy Flight Games listen to the community. It's the same about the price for the PQs. People complained about it, and it got changed. I think that we don't want to be whining all the time about anything. We need to be selective about the issues that we want to complain about. I mean, obviously everybody's entitled to his own opinion, and me, I'm going to be selective about the thing I'm going to be complaining about, or some things I'm going to be criticizing. But I'm going to be speaking my mind because I think it's beneficial for the game. And and I don't think it is beneficial for the game if you just put all the problems under the rug and not talking about it at all. And you're doing the community a disservice when you're doing that. I mean, if you genuinely believe that, for example, Boba doesn't need to be banned, then that's fine. But if you think that Boba should have been banned or nerfed and you didn't say anything about it ever, I think you're doing the community a disservice, because I think the more voices speak against the issue, the better it is, and especially when the issue is backed up with actual data, which we had plenty of thanks to the PQ season, but also even tournaments before that. FFG, once again, listened to the community and swiftly reacted, and that's great. I think FFG does not do everything perfectly, and that's okay, especially since we're talking about balancing. We're talking about designers who had to design multiple expansions in advance, years in advance sometimes, and it's very, very difficult to balance a game like this years in advance. You're talking about a small team that is working on a game, and they're working on a version of the game that is ever-changing. We are basically playing a version of the game that is stable, that doesn't change, really, from an expansion to another. While they work on an expansion that is changing every week. Every week they are creating new cards, or they are changing new cards, they're tweaking the game constantly. So finding and breaking the game, breaking the meta, whenever you are in so little time with so few people is extremely difficult. And that's why balancing a trading card game like this is extremely difficult, especially that once you've made those changes, you cannot make any adjustment, and you have to design those sets years in advance. Even before the release of the game, they were already working on set 7, even before the release of the game. That is crazy amount of foresight that you need to be able to have in order to have a balanced game. So it is absolutely not uncommon to have a balancing issue. So there's nothing shameful about banning something. It is a completely normal part of the process of publishing a trading card games. And FFG has been extremely listening to the community, and they reacted extremely swiftly, because the complete domination of Boba, even though Boba has been the best deck in the game since the beginning, it was under control in set 1. It's only in set 2, specifically when the PQ season started, that we realized how insanely busted the leader is. So if you consider the fact that only the complete domination of Boba started in early October, it's not even a month, and they've already decided to ban him, which I think is a great decision, but is also a swift reaction. So big thumbs up to FFG on this, and kudos to them for listening. Moving on, of course, Boba is not banned, he is suspended. In my opinion, is a marketing, I call it work, but it's a word, it's a marketing word. It's not, it doesn't ban, even bans in Magic are never definitive. Some cards get unbanned on a regular basis, even in Magic. So ban has never meant definitive, but they use the word suspended. I think it's a smart move from them, because it makes it sound less definitive, so people are maybe a little bit less salty about it, for people who own a showcase, for example. And of course, it also probably means that they might be able to reprint it with a fixed stats and cost. If that's the case, personally, my opinion is simply raising the cost of Boba Fett up to 6 resources to be deployed would be more than enough to solve the problem. I don't think a stats reduction from 4-6, which is another suggestion that players were having, I don't think this would be enough. I think a stats cost raise up to 6 would be enough to put the leaders in line with the rest of the other leaders. So now the big question is, what does it mean for the meta? What does it mean for the game? Well, obviously, there are going to be some winners from this. So talk about the leaders and decks that benefit the most from the ban, or the suspension, whatever you want to call it. The number one is obviously Sabine. So Sabine is, as you know, the strongest aggro deck in the game. One of the strongest deck in the game, especially if you talk in terms of raw power. And it's a deck that had a relatively bad matchup against Boba Fett in general, because Boba Fett was able to sustain the aggression from Sabine and be able to kill it very quickly and even race it in later stage of the game. So in that sense, I think Sabine is really benefiting a lot from this ban. And it is something that a lot of people pointed out, that like they're very scared that if Boba gets banned, that Sabine is going to reign supreme on the meta. Stay safe, guys. Rest easy. I don't think it's going to happen, and I'll explain you why. Sabine is, yes, it is an extremely powerful deck in terms of raw power, but it's also a very easy deck to counter. It's a deck that, unlike Boba, which was a deck that was extremely difficult to counter, that there were no specific cards that were specifically amazing against Boba. You would have like card that, oh yeah, this card is okay against Fire Spray, this card is good against Phantom, whatever. But Boba can attack in so many different angles, and there's also different versions of Boba, Boba Yellow, Boba Red, Boba Green, that are very different from one another. It was almost impossible to counter. Like, Boba is a deck that was extremely versatile and very difficult to nerf, to ban. There were no decks in set 2 that was capable of having better than a 55% win rate against Boba. And Sabine is a completely different story. There are plenty of decks in the meta that are completely capable of crushing Sabine without any problem. And now that you don't have to worry about Boba anymore, the control decks, notably the Kira decks, are going to be able to focus more on Sabine instead of having to beat the Boba deck. And that's going to mean that people are going to have more room to counter Sabine. So I don't think Sabine is going to be a problem. Obviously, she's going to be very, very strong, but people are simply going to change their deck, and there's plenty of decks that have a great matchup against Sabine. I mentioned, for example, Kira. I think Kira can be built to destroy Sabine if it plays the right cards. Cat Bane is also very strong in Sabine. Bosk is very, very strong in Sabine. Like, Boss Control is really good against Sabine. It just simply is as simple as that. Is that people are simply just going to adapt their build to be able to focus their build to beat aggro. And I don't think aggro is going to be a problem, because it is strong, yes, but counterable, as opposed to Boba, which was not only very strong, but also very difficult to counter as well. Moving on, we got Cat Bane. Cat Bane is benefiting a lot from this ban in 2 ways. The first, of course, is competition as far as villainy, cunning leaders. Boba, it was very difficult to justify playing any other leader than Boba whenever you were going to run a cunning villainy deck. The second reason is that the Cat Bane attacking town deck that we saw a lot in set 2 was actually a pretty strong deck that was really good against Sabine, that also did okay against control thanks to the Bane McClunky combo. It was a deck that was able to beat a wide variety of deck, but it had a horrible matchup against Boba. And now that Boba is gone, this deck is definitely going to be a lot better. Moving on, we got Han Solo. Han Solo is another leader that really has struggled against Boba. Boba has just so many ways to answer Han Solo and Fire Spray, and it was incredibly difficult to deal with for Han Solo as well. The fact that, so there's just so many bad things going on for Boba. The fact that Boba was ramping very consistently, which means that he could easily dodge the tech slash the tech DJ combo. All this really made the matchup really difficult for Han. A skillful Han player could definitely even the odds a little bit, but it will still remains a pretty bad matchup. And Han is a very, very good deck. Even with the presence of Boba, it was one of the tier 1 decks of set 2, especially Han Yellow. And I'm expecting that Han Yellow is going to be an extremely strong force in this new meta. And the reason being is, first of all, of course, Boba is gone. But the other reason is that Han Yellow got a lot of new tools from this new set. Notably, Enfys Nest is a great upgrade for the deck, and also R2D2. Both of those cards are going to be great for the deck. So Han Solo is definitely getting a lot of upgrades here, and is going to be a very, very strong deck in the meta. But once again, just like Sabine, Han Solo is a counterable deck. If Han Solo becomes tier 1, if Han Solo becomes like the 1-2 decks most played deck in the set, the 1-2 most played deck in the upcoming meta, then obviously people are going to adapt. And there's plenty of things you can do to counter Han. Anything that can one-shot Han is just incredible. Preventing him from going for the double ramp is something that you can very easily do. Stuff like this. So, in number 4, there's Jango Fett. Obviously, Jango Fett is being from a leader that I didn't even put Jango Fett in my honorable mention in my ranking of the best leaders in the set, of the top 3 best leader in the set. And now I genuinely think that Jango is the best leader in set 3. I think that Jango, notably Jango Red, so basically the new version of Boba Red, so you just replace Boba by Jango and you play like a full space aggro deck with Jango. I think this deck is going to be incredibly powerful. Obviously, the leader himself is decent, but the real quality of Jango is obviously being able to be used with Fire Spray. So I think that Jango Red space aggro is going to be a very, very strong deck. It's only a small downgrade. Like, basically playing Jango instead of Boba, if you're playing Boba Green or Boba Yellow, that's a massive, massive downgrade. Like, it's a huge downgrade. But in Boba Red specifically, it's not as big of a downgrade. It is worse. It is definitely significantly worse, but it's not like a huge, huge downgrade. So Jango Red is going to be a very strong deck. But once again, it's a deck that is very counterable, just like Sabine, just like Han, just like Cad Bane. Those are not Bobas in the sense that they are much easier to counter. And this is obviously means that it's going to be very, very good for the meta. So what I anticipate is going to happen is we're going to have a very aggro meta at the beginning, and it will stabilize. It will stabilize. People will adapt. People will play deck that beats Sabine, notably. We're going to also see a new range of mid-range decks appear. Hopefully some from set 3, probably maybe, why not some obviously Jango Fett we talked about earlier, Anakin Skywalker decks, and why not even like Yoda deck also will make an appearance as well. So that's going to be pretty awesome. Also, Boba Fett Daimyo is also a deck that I think was already very underestimated for set 2. I think it's a deck that I think has good chances of being quite represented as well in the new meta. And obviously, in an environment where there's going to be a lot of mid-range, Control might be able to bloom again. Control was the answer to Boba in set 1, but in set 2, it was unable to beat Boba because of all the great anti-control sideboard cards that Boba had, which completely flipped the matchup after sideboard. So, once again, that's something to take into account. That's going to be very interesting. Anyway, guys, let me know in the comments below, what do you think about this? Do you think FFG made the right call? And do you agree with my anticipation as far as how the meta is going to head? And are you happy about this change? And are you excited for the upcoming new meta that's going to appear from this? Let me know in the comments below. And without further ado, I'll say goodbye, and I'll see you next time.